Hello, everyone, and welcome to Cabinet Conversations. My name is Erica Scott, and I am the Artistic Programming Manager here at Ford's Theater. If you are joining us for the first time, this is our live series exploring creativity, history, and leadership. You can learn more and explore our past programs by visiting our website at www.fords.org. 156 years ago today, President Abraham Lincoln died at the Peterson boarding house hours after John Wilkes Booth shot him at Ford's Theater. The act traumatized the people who were in the theater and the country as a whole, and led to the Ford's Theater stage being dark for 103 years. As a means of processing the events that occurred at the site, Ford's Theater commissioned Richard Hellison's one-act play, One Destiny, in which Ford's Theater's original owner, Harry Ford, and actor Harry Hawk reflect on what they witnessed. The play is traditionally presented on our stage as part of our daytime visit schedule, but as we are closed due to the pandemic, we were forced to rethink how to create effective storytelling for our audiences. Fortunately, we were able to safely film One Destiny this fall, and it is now available for free streaming on demand on the Ford's Theater website through June 13, 2021. Storytelling helps us process difficult events we've experienced, whether individually or historically as a society. Today, we bring together three people to discuss the crossroads of history, storytelling, and healing. I am so pleased to welcome Richard Hellison, Temidayo Ame, and Catherine McCarthy. Richard Hellison is author of the Ford's Theater commissioned plays One Destiny, Necessary Sacrifices, The Road from Appomattox, and The Walking Tour, Investigation Detective McDevitt. He also co-wrote the book for Ford's Theater's production of Frank Wildhorn's Freedom Song, Abraham Lincoln and the Civil War, and the script for the 2015 Lincoln Assassination Commemoration, Now He Belongs to the Ages. Hellison's plays for adults and young audiences have been produced at theaters including South Coast Repertory, the Denver Center, the Los Angeles Repertory Company, City Theater in Miami, and the Sundance Children's Theater. His 24 short plays include 5 finalists for the Actors Theater of Louisville Heidman Award. He is the recipient of writing awards from the National Theater Conference, Penn USA West, and the Beverly Hills Theater Guild, and was playwright in residence at the William Ing Center for the Arts in Kansas in 2009 and 2012. In addition, he enjoys working with new plays through one-on-one dramaturgy for playwrights at the Center in Minneapolis. Temidayo Ame is a non-binary writer, actor, producer, healer, and queer activist born and raised here in Washington, D.C. They are a multi-Helen Hayes Award nominated performer, with their last award being for Outstanding Supporting Performer in Schoolgirls, or the African Mean Girls play. Ame is a founding member of the Black Artists Coalition and serves on myriad advisory committees at the intersection of race and gender and art. Ame has been featured in American Theater Magazine, The Washington Post, and DC Theater Scene, among other publications. In addition to writing and producing, Ame is a director, collaborating most recently with Arts on the Horizon's Once Upon a Zoom, currently on view at the National Theater. They are the founder and executive producer of Pilot, a creation studio dedicated to celebrating queer Black joy, to making queer Black history, and to fostering queer Black liberation. Catherine McCarthy is a New York City-based psychotherapist who works at the intersection of therapy and storytelling. Before becoming a therapist, she served as the co-creator of the education programs for storytelling phenomenon, The Moth, where she used personal storytelling in performance as a tool to help young people to build community, gain confidence, and reflect on their lives. The stories she directed on the Moth main stage can be read in the New York Times bestseller, The Moth Presents Occasional Magic, and The Moth Presents All These Wonders. and can be heard on Peabody Award-winning The Moth Radio Hour and podcast. Catherine holds her master's in social work from Fordham University. Welcome to you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello.
What a great group.
As a reminder to all of our viewers, we are taking your questions on social media platforms, so please feel free to submit and share so that we can share your questions with our guests during the program. All right, now that's done. Let's get into it. So, Richard, I'm going to start with you.
All right.
As you mentioned in the introductions, One Destiny is one of 4 historical plays that you've written for Ford's. Can you talk a little bit about creating theatrical pieces about true historical events and characters? Like, what is your process?
Sure. Although I guess true is relative, which is maybe that's the point. I at the risk of being the first person in the history of Ford's theater to quote Joseph Stalin, he ostensibly said, a single death is a tragedy, a million deaths is a statistic. And I don't think he actually said that, but I think it does get to something. That for me, the process starts with making it personal. We'll be talking about, large events, and in my niche, historical events, they're massive. And they're almost impossible to comprehend. I mean, I can't comprehend that 500,000 people died of COVID. Okay, that number is too big. But when I read a story in the Washington Post about one person or one family or one relationship, that brings it here. I can't comprehend the immensity of the Holocaust, okay, or of slavery. I mean, it's too massive to even wrap my mind around. But I can read A Diary of Anne Frank, or I can watch Steve McQueen's great film 12 Years a Slave about Solomon Northup and begin to try to understand and approach it. So, I mean, for me, that's where it starts, is to try to get the storytelling down to a personal level, because that's what I think an audience in the theater is ultimately going to relate to.
Mm-hmm.
And that's most of the work, I think. Once you do the research, it's what's the personal connection for.
I think that it's so important that you mention the audience and that they're part of your process and you consider them. What do you want the audience to take away when they're encountering the history that's in your plays?
That's a great question, because I think historical drama is weighted with that phrase. Uh-oh, it's a lecture. Okay. And it can't be that. I'm sure the question is going to come up about the extent to which you go with history or you go with something else. Mm-hmm. And it's theater. And I increasingly believe, and I am a great fan of, intellectual writers or Shaw, people like that. But I increasingly believe that audiences go to the theater for an emotional experience. Mm-hmm. Because we get a lot of intellectual experience all the time. We're bombarded with it, with news and the events of the world. And sometimes our emotional responses don't have an outlet. Mm-hmm. And I think that the arts are what allow for that. It has to start with me. Something has to move me first as a person to want to write about that subject and find my way into that. But what theater does, it seems to me, is allow us to be moved, or even more, give us permission to be moved. I mean, when you get into that space and you're not just you're in that group audience, it's like you have permission to allow yourself to be moved. So I think I'm less concerned that people go away knowing things. I mean, they may, and if they would like to go find out more, read more about it, when they leave, that's great. But I feel like I want them to feel connected as people and emotionally to the story that we're exploring. That's the main thing for me, which means that I have to try to be connected with that.
Yeah. Catherine, so last fall, we hosted a conversation with a psychologist and mental health journalist to talk about different forms of grieving. And here we are a year later, and the conversation has not changed. We introduced you and we talked about how you're at the intersection of therapy and storytelling. Could you share with us how storytelling plays into the healing?
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, so, I think we're here today to talk in part about the storytelling experience of theater. And I'm resonating so much, Richard, with what you're saying about the emotional experience and the personal connection of theater. I come from more the sort of the very personal individual storytelling kind of experience. At the Moth, it was all about a person telling a true story from their lives on stage. And in therapy, it's a different forum, but and a different aim. But to me, it still very much is about a person being witnessed and heard as they share the stories of their lives. So to talk a little bit, to start with, I guess, the personal, since that's sort of where I come from, and how storytelling is a part of healing. One sort of definition of healing, or one really critical aspect of healing, is to come to a coherent and cohesive autobiographical narrative, to make sense of the things that have happened to you and make meaning of them. We humans are meaning-making creatures. And so we need that. We need to be able to understand ourselves, to have this sense of this is me, and understand the hardships and the joys, and sort of have an organized kind of sense of our own narrative. And storytelling can really help us do that. So to think a little bit about trauma and how trauma affects the brain and the nervous system, a traumatic experience is stored in the right hemisphere of the brain only. That the right brain is where it's images, it's emotions, it's physical sensations. The left brain is where we can sequence events, we can kind of organize, we can put language to it. And so what can be so distressing about trauma is to only have those images, those feelings, without the organization, without, I heard a teacher of mine described it as like a film strip that's been just cut up and scattered on the floor. And to tell a story from your life, you need to be able to share those images and those emotions, but also what happened. Walk us through it, sequence it. And that experience, that process is like picking up those scattered pieces and putting them back together, literally reintegrating the memory in the left and right brain. But also the felt sense as you go through it is a sense of like, oh, I can make meaning of this. I can understand it. And that is very, very healing.
Yeah, definitely. You get a different perspective when you have to step back, look at it from an outside view, and then connect it back to your life. So it's definitely, yeah. Timmy.
Yes.
You are an actor, a writer, a director. You do everything. I love it. One of the last things that I actually saw before the pandemic shut down was your work at Keegan. You did Alice in Wonderland.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I feel like that was literally like one of the last things I saw, other than like we were trying to put on Guys and Dolls. So literally the last, like that day we shut down and we did a dress rehearsal for Guys and Dolls. The last thing that I saw publicly was Alice in Wonderland. And I know that dealt with finding yourself and dealing with coming out and people not understanding and getting to a point where you're like, I don't care what everybody else says.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the most amazing things. It's a different kind of trauma than when people automatically associate storytelling and trauma.
Yeah, that show is interesting because it wasn't the traditional, like what we have come to know as coming out as someone saying, oh, this is my preference on who I love or how I practice my sexuality. It was actually an exploration of one identifying one's gender identity, specifically in a realm where people have already assumed they know you. This Alice in Wonderland is an adaptation of Alice in Wonderland. And so when Alex steps into or goes down the rabbit hole, literally, everyone assumes that they know who that person is. Oh, it's Alice. Alice is back. And we watch again and again them go through this journey of saying, no, this is who I am. You might have seen a different iteration of me once upon a time, but I'm telling you who I am. And because it is me, from my own self in this new alignment of self, you need to believe that, because this is what it is here and now. And I think it was incredibly profound for us to be doing that play. I feel like 2020, even before the pandemic started, we were really getting into what it meant to be in these new gender identities, all of a sudden getting so much, popular culture light. And what I wanted to make very clear in that rendition of the story, and what I was very specific about, was that this person that we are seeing as Alex is a person of color. Mm-hmm. One, because I think there is a reclamation of the story itself, Alice in Wonderland, written by this very British man about, all of these very strange and, out of this world people that I, in many ways, attribute to the different countries that were at one point colonized by the United Kingdom, by the English Empire. And so we're watching that unfolding, and then we're also watching this person of color say to these other people, in a sense where once upon a time they were otherworldly, but it is now Alex that is the anomaly in the space. Mm-hmm. And specifically this person that I've cast, being Black, being abundant in body, to say, this is who I am, and you will believe me, and you will see me as I am here and now. And it was only a reading, and we only did it one time.
It was great, though.
We were saying a lot.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that was. I'm really glad that was one of the last things that you got to witness, because I think it was the beginning of a lot for us in 2020, as we were diving into the second big wave of the Black Lives Matter movement and the movement for Black lives and Black liberation. And in this time, it was so different than when I had first experienced it in 2016, because all of a sudden we were saying, yes, Black lives matter, Black trans lives matter, Black queer lives matter, Black non-binary lives matter. And we are being very specific about the language to make sure that this time around, we are not forgetting anybody in the throes of it.
Mm-hmm. So I want to ask you about Pilot. As you mentioned, Black queer lives, Black trans lives, and Pilot is described in your bio as, I'm scrolling back up so I can read it right.
Yeah.
A creation studio dedicated to celebrating queer Black joy, making queer Black history, and fostering queer Black liberation. Can you tell us a little bit about the work you do?
Yes. So Pilot is a brainchild of myself in the heat of summer 2020, when everyone was, especially us artists, were like, what are we doing with our time? Because all the theaters were closed, and even a lot of the production studios had also stopped filming, and so I was looking around thinking about how I specifically, in the life that I've chosen to live as an artist, can pour into the movement for Black lives, without necessarily being on the street every day, because I recognize in my body that that was not going to be sustainable for me. And so I wanted to find a way to continue the movement in my own way. And it meant for me making space and lifting up story for Black, queer, and trans people. And so our Pilot's first breath of life came via a partnership with the Reclamation Project DC, headed by Christopher Michael Richardson, who is an incredible human being, and I hope you all will get to know him.
I love him.
Super special. Oh my God. And so in that space, I was saying to Christopher, I want a space where Black people, right, especially Black people in theater, who have a passion and a yearning to learn about film and to learn about TV and to get their hands on equipment, are given that space. Because so often the barrier for Black people, Black queer people, and people of color, and specifically, or in general, is a barrier of access. And so in its first breath, it was like, let's take away the barrier and give you first-hand access to the equipment so you can touch it and feel it and tinker with it and experiment with it. So you can learn by doing. And we had, a videographer and a cinematographer come in and say, this is how you use these instruments. And we spent a day learning about what it meant to break down a scene from moment to moment, to shot by shot, what it meant to be a part of TV production, what it looked like in terms of creating a pitch deck for when you create your own pilot. And we ended our week after an incredible lecture from Ajewa Asante about the history of Black people in American television, and then even more specifically, the history of African people in American television. We ended that entire week of exploration with a roundtable discussion where myself and the other members of Pilot talked about what we wanted to see in the future of storytelling for Black people, and how we can continue this movement for Black lives on the screen, as well as we are doing it in the theater, as well as we are doing it, in the courtroom, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
That's phenomenal. That really is phenomenal.
Yeah.
Amazing.
It is, and you absolutely segue me into my next line of questioning, and I appreciate you for that. So a large part of this program is that trauma in the world is not new. Generation after generation after generation has dealt with it from the start of time. We know that ancient times have shown that theater and performance has been used as a source of medicine and a means of corralling people and fostering group healing, which can be super beneficial. We even know that Lincoln loved theater and used theater as an escape. He's quoted as saying, to be alone and yet with people, it rests me. Coming into a space and being able to focus on something that isn't your everyday help to calm him. And for me personally, that is exactly why I do this job. That is exactly why I'm here. I am the same way. I love to sit in a theater, not always by myself. Sometimes I say you need to talk to somebody after you've seen the shows, but often I am that's where I'm most comfortable. I want to ask you all, what do you find is the health benefit to theater and storytelling? And anyone can jump in first. I'll call on you if you want me to, but if you have an answer. Catherine, do you want to go first?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, the health benefit of storytelling. So one of the kind of profoundly devastating effects of trauma is, and that could be an individual trauma or a collective trauma, like you're saying, that we've experienced throughout history, is an experience of trauma disconnects you from other people. Like people report feeling isolated, alienated, and especially if that trauma has been at the hands of another human being, you lose trust, you lose the ability to sort of to feel attuned to other people. And I love, in therapy, we use this word a lot, attunement. And I love that it comes from the musical world. It really is this feeling of like, when you feel attuned with others, you feel like you are in harmony, you are in accord together. And trauma makes you lose that in some way. And so to me, any kind of collective experience can be corrective for that kind of disconnect, that to come together in a theater to be, like Lincoln said, alone but with others, and to witness something together, even just that experience of doing something, witnessing something together is a corrective experience for trauma. And I think even more so when the stories on stage are a place, a container where we are working out these experiences, sort of working out the questions of what it means to be here, of like the emotional truth of how we feel, and that it allows for that space for processing as well. And you're doing it together in some way.
Yeah. I remember growing up, I watched a lot of movies growing up. I don't think I went to the theater until I was at a magnet school, where I think, if I remember correctly, they took us to the Kennedy Center to watch an opera. But yeah, before then, it was all movies all the time. And we would gather as a family and watch movies together. And after the movies, my parents, specifically my mother, being a Nigerian woman that she is, both my parents are from Nigeria, both Yoruba origin. My parents would turn to me and say, okay, so what did that movie tell you? What did you learn? And we would literally recant to them about what we learned and what we saw and how this movie brought that forward for us. And then, that stopped. We got older. They started doing the things. I'm sure we weren't, we were over it, if you will. And I think I forgot about that for a while. I really did. I think a part of me has held on to it, but in a general sense, it's like, oh, we go to the thing, we do the escaping or whatever it is. Especially because a lot of what we're seeing, both on screen and on stage, can be attributed to just the need for escape. And I don't put that down in any way. I think there's a place and a time and a necessary need, need for some escapism. I'm speaking specifically to the storytelling, the ancestral storytelling that comes from the Yoruba people as well, of saying, this is what this story is telling you about life. This is how you can use this story to live your life. And it wasn't until I think the first time I really felt like I am with a group of people going on a journey was sitting in the theater on that Thursday night opening for Black Panther. I remember being in the theater space. They can wait. I remember being in the theater. Everyone was dressed up in garb, traditional Ankara African clothing. And we watched the movie, and we were breathing together. And it was, I mean, I'm getting chills just thinking about it. And I remember the movie ending and everybody staying seated. One, because as you know, Marvel usually has a sneak preview. And two, because nobody wanted the moment to be over. We were all waiting. If we could have pitched a tent in that theater and spent the night, we would have. And I remember going home feeling so big. I was beaming on the way home, not only because I was with my kin, watching this film about Black empowerment, about people, about this Afrofuturism, this space where, that is uncolonized, that is free, that is powerful. I felt like for the first time on screen, I had seen something that was so close to me. As Richard was saying, they were telling my story. Granted, no one's ever been to Wakanda. Wakanda doesn't exist. Not in our universe, but I believe in parallel.
My heart.
There is a universe somewhere where Wakanda exists, and we'll all be one day. But yeah, it was just being in a space, feeling so powerful, feeling so seen by this film, feeling like, is this what people felt like when they watched Captain America? Is this what people felt like when they watched Iron Man? And I'd love a Marvel movie, but I don't leave the theater feeling that way. And it was the first time I was just looking around at all of these Black and brown people leaving the theater beaming. And it was, that moment was priceless for me.
That's actually, both of you have been talking about are things that I've also thought about as well. And you both sort of mentioned the same idea in two different ways, the idea of breathing together. I think somebody actually did a study a couple of years ago, if I remember, about theater audiences where they kept track of it. And they discovered that at certain really intense moments of the play, the entire audience is breathing together. The heart rates are beginning to get synchronized. That there's something about that coming together, as Catherine says, that does that to us. But the other thing I was picking up on, both of you were talking about, is that it's not just the event; it's the before and the after.
Mm-hmm.
My favorite place to hang out in the theater is not just the bar, but is the lobby.
Yeah.
Before the show and an intermission is the best place in the world to be in the theater if you're able to do that. You're not an actor backstage, because first you're witnessing the coming together of everybody coming from different places, and they're all meeting each other and they're checking their whatever it is, But they're individuals, but they're beginning to do this, and then they go in. And if you're in the same place when they come out, as Tabatayo says, and it's gone really well, you've got a whole different audience coming out of that theater. They're a different being coming out of that theater.
Yeah.
Which is why, as I think you were saying, what we've lost so much in the pandemic, what it may have taught us is what social creatures we are and how much we need that, how much we need each other, and how much we need to come together. When you ask people, somebody should have trademarked this phrase, made a fortune off of it, when this is over, or when things get back to, and we're not going to say normal because, we don't know what that is. But nobody says, I really want to go to a desert island by myself. What they say is, I want to go to the theater. I want to go to the movies. I want to go to a ball game. I want to travel. I want to be with people, as Lincoln said. That I think we've begun to really realize that without knowing we were going to have that taken away once it was taken away from us. I think we've begun to really understand how valuable and how important that is. And if we can get, medical insurers to cover my cost of theater travel and ball games, I would be absolutely, for medical purposes, I'll be a very happy man.
Same.
I have comments, but I gotta keep them for the groups today. But no, I identify, and I feel like I had that moment. I've had that twice. I had a moment when Fords did Ragtime, and I took my mom, and that was what was playing when I was just before I started at Fords, and it was a great show. And Peter had directed it so beautifully, and there was a moment, if you all don't know Ragtime, our viewers, if you are unfamiliar with Ragtime, there is a moment that does cover police brutality and murder and everything that Black and brown people are experiencing today. It was in Ragtime, and at that time, it was already happening, but it seemed to be on the uptick in the social world. And I remember, I think Eben was playing Sarah that day, and when he was shot, and killed, the audience exhaled, and all you heard was sniffles and tears and sobbing. And I had not had an experience like that before, and something in me clicked, and I was like, this is why I do this. Because everyone in that space, the people on stage, the people in the audience, learn something. Whether they are willing to admit it or not, they learn something in that moment.
And I thought it was a brilliant show. And that response you're talking about, it's the empathetic response, really, isn't it? And it's such a remarkable thing that human beings can do. And I'm naive, but I really believe that everyone is born empathetic, and we give it up, we give it away, or we let it be taken, or we shut it off somehow. And so much of the challenge of the world is getting empathy back to where it belongs. And so it seems to me that that's so much of the power of storytelling. Is part of that is you were empathetic. You understood as a child. You understood, and you were willing to give yourself to other people, and you gave that up somehow. Why did you give that up? Okay, so now it's my job as an artist to begin to get that back to you. As part of a larger sense of healing things. And those moments where everyone in the theater is sniffling. I love that. I love crying in the theater and laughing. Because you mentioned the word joy earlier when you were talking about Timothy's work. And we can get sometimes so caught up in the idea of trauma that we can also forget that sometimes what you get from trauma is a better understanding of joy and the necessity of joy. If it's all just about the trauma, the joy needs to be the outcome at the other end. It seems to me.
Well, and I think that's so true, Richard, and that you know, healing is not just about sort of removing the suffering or processing the suffering. It's also about rediscovering and expanding your capacity for joy and for playfulness. And I think that in some ways is what the arts can do, even if we're never talking about sort of we're not talking about the trauma directly, but that we are also kind of, even that escapism that Temidayo was mentioning before, that all is a space of sort of reclaiming your capacity for joy and you know, curiosity, goofiness.
Yeah,
Absolutely. And as this is live, things happen. Temidayo will be back. As we continue in that vein, until they are back with us, I had that second experience during Hamilton and seeing what history dictates. I mean, these were real people. They were not Black people, but seeing that show, you know, with people that look like me, representing George Washington and Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson, blew my mind, because now I'm being included in the story in a way that I was not before. And everyone has to deal with that. We were here then too, and we are part of this story as well, you know, and it is, as a nation, it is our story. You know, and that was in trying to deal with my place in the world and the ancestral trauma that comes with that. I am a Black woman in society. Seeing something like Hamilton, beyond the fact that it is just like freaking amazing how they produced that show, you know, like seeing it from that perspective, just wow, you know, it opened doors. It made me feel like anything is possible. So.
Well, and I think, Erica, that speaks so much to just the power of the imagination, that when we imagine something, our brains are lighting up as if it's happening. Like and so to be able to use, like, there's something really powerful about a historical show that is showing you sort of like, that is very sort of true to what happened, but there's also something incredible, like you're talking about, of having an experience that is meeting, in some ways, meeting a need that wasn't there, or is a corrective experience, going back to the past, but allowing it to be different this time. And that also is part of why theater and the arts can, and that kind of storytelling can be so transformative.
Yeah, if I may, and I just want to thank everybody. You know, life is happening. We're here.
Absolutely.
This is one of the reasons that I have always come back to TVYA, which is Theater for Young Audiences, Theater for Very Young Audiences. And as Erica mentioned, our show, Once Upon a Zoom, was created for Theater for Very Young Audiences. And it was very important for me and my co-director, Anderson Wells, that our story center Black joy, Black expression, Black healing. The story sits on two people who are trying to communicate via video call. Hence the name, Once Upon a Zoom, and technology being what it is, LOL. It's not possible for them, and one goes to sleep, and the other, I think, one is coming home from school, and one is getting ready to start their day, and they're both in the mirror in their respective homes, and all of a sudden the veil lifts. And they can see each other in their mirrors. And as they're leaning in, the universe literally swallows them and transports them into a space where they can be physically together. And I mean, I love the show. Obviously, I'm biased. But just to create a world where we are reinforcing the notion that if you believe it, if you imagine it, and if you are sure of your imagination, then it is possible.
Mhm.
And to be able to give that gift to, I mean, babies that are 0 years old, babies that are 1, babies that are 2, babies that are 45, to say your imagination is a powerful force of nature and it should not be disregarded in any way, shape, or form. And if anything, the older you get, the more you should dive into your imagination instead of the other way around. It was a huge moment for us. It was huge. And I think that is one of the reasons why it got so much love, to the point that they were like, let's put this at the National, because it was such a necessary story for us at this time too, to say, you know, technology is going to be what it is and we're doing the best that we can with it. But don't forget that you have this limitless pool of creation and exploration that is inherent in you, that is a birthright for you, especially in these Black and brown and queer bodies, where one of the biggest, I think, as Catherine was saying, one of the worst parts of the traumatic experience is that it stifles that.
Yeah.
And it's one of the reasons why I've continuously been fought so hard, specifically with kids that are 0 to 7 years old, to say, I know this world is asking you to let go of that and to become so incredibly fixed in your human life that you forget that you have the power to create anything you've ever wanted in your existence. But if this 45-minute moment in time and space with you in your classroom can remind you of that, then my God, I have done something. I have done something. And that's really, that's one of the reasons I continue to go back to DBYA, because I was one of those kids who, having dealt with so much trauma, for the age of 10 years old, I mean, the life was crazy. And I'm so grateful that even through all of that, I was able to still hold on to my imagination.
Yeah.
And recognizing that my imagination probably saved my life.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I don't care how old or young or, near or far you are. If we can reassert the imagination in theater, in film, on the yoga mat, which is where I do a lot of my practice, and I do a lot of yoga for young audiences in yogic storytelling. I actually just did a piece with the Shakespeare Theater for their Family Fest on elves and fairies and sprites, to just remind them that the imagination is in every cell of their body, even as they're expanding and strengthening and toning. Then I feel like that is a part of how I give back and give forward to this world.
And if I could throw one thing in, and I really loved Once Upon a Zoom, and one of the things that I really enjoyed about it, it was wonderful. Oh yeah, I'm a 45-year-old kid. I wish I was a 45-year-old kid. No, but one of the things I loved about it, and I did TYA many years ago. Well, one time, I did 14 or 15 TYA shows when I was a younger writer, and they were actually the best learning place. They really were, because one of the things they taught me was to begin to try to understand how younger audiences think and what they need. And what I was getting to was one of the things I loved about Once Upon a Zoom was there were no words.
Yeah.
I'm a very word person, and I kept going, okay, when do they talk? And then I realized they're not. This is going to be, but what that said to me was that you respected your audience enough to not have to tell them what they needed to know. You knew that they would watch it visually and understand and connect with it on that level. And I say that because when we talk about storytelling, we said that we're storytelling, and we may think, it has to be verbal. We have to use words to do this. But there are so many other ways. There is music, there is dance, there is visual art. There are ways to tell stories that are not just verbally constructed. I mean, that's what I do, yes. But I love it so much. How do you do that? How do you do it with no words? And that's what Once Upon a Zoom did, was connect with that audience without having to tell them that, and assume and believe that they would get it.
And
I love that about it.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you. Also, and it gives the audience the opportunity to say, "Oh, I know what this story is," knowing full well it may not even be the story that you would have gotten had you watched it yesterday,
right?
Or had you watched it 15 minutes from now, or it's personal, and therefore it is whatever you need it to be for you.
Yeah.
And I so appreciate that. Thank you so much for saying that, Richard.
Please.
Absolutely. This conversation. I'm like, my cheek. I know it's about trauma. Like we started saying that we were going to talk about trauma, but look at the joy we found. Even just relating that it is important that we have theater that helps us process the trauma, but look at the joy that we can pull from it, and look at how we can be better people because of it. You know, it's amazing to me. This is why I do what I do. Right.
Period.
I want to talk a little bit about the reckoning and the reclamation of stories. It's no secret that this year and the past year, this year, the year before that has been very difficult for us. And we are seeing increasing instances of violence to Black and Brown people, to Asian people, to other minority groups. I want to hear from you guys about your perspective on how we as the creators, we as the healers, we as the people to help can work to take back the narrative. And I ask this specifically, you know, Richard, you are a playwright. You are a very specific playwright in that you are a white American man. And in this time, Temidayo is very similar. You are a Black American, Afro-American, African playwright. You know, people would say that, Richard, you can't write stories that Temidayo would perform and vice versa. And I think that it is important to understand that while that may be true for some, that it is not necessarily the right way to go. And I want to hear from you guys about your perspectives on how can we come together to address past trauma, to prevent future trauma. If that makes sense. I know I just asked a really long question, but I think I got it out there.
I actually want to touch on something that you just mentioned about, which I guess comes to the question of standing, I suppose, of an artist. And I mean, ideally, I'm one of those people that believes anybody should be able to write anything if you exercise the powers of imagination and if you are willing to do the work necessary to tell that story the way it needs to be told. But I also, as somebody once said, you also, it seems to me, you're obligated, any artist is obligated to ask themselves, am I the right person to tell this story? So while I may respond to it and I may connect with it, I mean, there's a lot of stories I connect with. Okay, I wrote a play about Frederick Douglass. Okay, and Frederick Douglass and I are not exactly confused with each other very often. But I can relate to that. Okay, but so there may be a lot of things I can relate to, but am I the right person to undertake that storytelling? Even if I do bring all my powers to the table or whatever it is, there's a point in which I probably need to say to myself, no, I'm not the right person to tell that story, and yield the floor. That I think that's an area we're all still sort of navigating right now. That at least that's my feeling about it. The other thing that I would say is, so that's as far as taking back the narrative. Who's doing the taking, and for what purpose are you doing the taking?
Like you understood what I was getting at there.
Yeah. Okay, why are we taking this? But the other thing is prevention, and I have to say, I don't feel, for myself, I don't feel that that's possible, and I don't even feel that that's my job. That the best that I can do in a moment is to try to tell the truth of a story and enlighten an event or a trauma in such a way that when it happens again, I've provided another way of looking at it. I've provided a different context for it through the art. This is going to maybe sound like a terrible example, but we know there was an incident very recently in which a young Black man was shot by an officer who ostensibly said they were intending to use a taser. And the very first thing that jumped into my mind when I heard that was Fruitvale Station, which was Ryan Coogler's film about Oscar Grant on the BART, because that's what happened to him. And for me, it was sort of amazing to realize that my first response to this new trauma was an artwork, was a film that had shaped my understanding. And that film was several years ago, but I think it seems to me that may speak to the power of art, not necessarily to prevent what may happen anyway, but to give us another way of looking at it that's already there when that thing comes along, if that makes any sense.
Oh, this is I wish we had more time.
I know.
I am, full disclosure, I'm taking just slight liberties, but I know, we are dropping that play that Richard talked about with Frederick Douglass right after this. And so I know we have to wrap, but I want to give both you, Temidayo, and you, Catherine, an opportunity to respond. Time be darned.
Yeah. Okay, so I have a couple of points, and I'll do them fairly rapid fire. My first being, we know the power of playwrights and screenwriters and writers. They can write some incredibly beautiful stories. What I am interested in at this moment in time is saying, yes, you lovely white cis man, you can do a hell of a job directing The Color Purple. But there are probably 45 other people who have yet to have that space and time. So give them that space and time. You've had your go. And it's the same with, we can talk about anything in that realm. We can talk about playwrights, we can talk about artists, we can talk about physicians, we can talk about astronauts, we can talk about presidents, we can talk about et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I feel when we have had the time and the space where everybody has given a go to the thing, right? And this conversation has been very centralized on Black and Brown people, but there are also Native and Indigenous people, if we're talking about who was really here first, you feel me? And we haven't even gotten a space for them to get a go. We're still trying to get a space for Black and Brown and Asian and Latinx and queer and trans people to get a go. That's my first point, is give people a go first. You've had your go. My second point is, Richard mentioned this word, I believe, of prevention. And I think it's an incredibly powerful word, and it comes back to me. It comes back to me in the word of imagination as well. Being a person who is also queer, who is also trans, non-binary, there is a history of storytelling specific to the screen, but not exclusive to the screen. It has worked its way onto the stage as well, where because the general truth of what we know about trans people is violence, we illustrate violence on stage. That's what we have seen. And I believe in the power to say what we put on stage, what we put in fiction can become true. Yeah. That the life will mimic the art. And so if there was a space where we said we will retire trauma on trans bodies, we will retire trauma on Black and Brown bodies, we will retire trauma on disabled, queer, neurodivergent bodies, because we've had enough of that. Again, give another story a go. So that we can fire synapses in that direction, and not just the direction to say, oh, they're doing Pose and there's a bunch of trans people on screen, someone's gonna die.
Yeah.
Literally, the screenwriter had to say to the people who were watching the first season of Pose, no one is going to die, because the trans audience was already primed and ready to see their own deaths on screen. What if we lived in a space and time where that was not the case? They know that is a possibility. It is time for new possibilities. That's my second point. I had a third one, but it's gone.
Those are very powerful points. Well,
Yes.
and I absolutely agree with you on your second point. Like we need those stories, but we do need new stories. We need to tell the joy. We need to tell the everyday life. We need more Issa Raes. We need more Ryan's telling that not everybody gonna die today. They might die, but not today.
Exactly.
I absolutely agree. Catherine?
Yeah, I mean, I'm remembering watching the first season of Pose and how I was afraid the entire time, waiting for someone to die, and realizing that sometimes retelling a trauma narrative, sometimes it's really important to surface, this is happening, this is a part of the experience, but we can't stop there. And I think you're absolutely right, Temidayo, like, when do we get to tell the new story, and when do we get to center queer joy, trans joy, Black joy, brown joy, etc. That is in some ways imagining the world that we want to see. Not to sound so cheesy about it, but that it is. I think that is such a crucial part of what the theater and what the arts can do. And it also just makes me think, to your first point about give someone else a go, is just how important your pilot project is. That so much of that is about access, and creating the platforms, creating the space where new people can step up to the microphone.
Thank you.
I wish I could talk to y'all for a whole nother hour, and I'm sure that our viewers would be like, yes, more. But I want to say thank you all so much for this conversation today. Our tech team was like, this conversation is lightning. So I did. And I am so glad that we got the three of you in the room today to talk about this. It's so important, and I'm so glad that we have it. So thank you.
Thank you.
To our audience, we hope that you enjoyed the conversation today with Richard Hellison, Temidayo Ame, and Catherine McCarthy. We will continue to respond to your Facebook and Twitter comments and questions that we didn't have time for today in this live session. As a Ford's programming note, we hope that you will join us back here for our National Oratory Fellows Story Night on May 13 at 7 p.m. Eastern Time to hear some of our fellows share their experiences during this year of pandemic. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please consider making a financial gift to Ford's Theater to help support our work and mission. You may do so at fords.org/donate. We hope to see you again here at Cabinet Conversations on May 3rd. That is a special Monday event, not a Thursday event, a Monday event, as we will be in collaboration with the Abraham Lincoln Institute. Until then, please stay safe, please stay well, and we will see you next time.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And